All right, it's time. Welcome again, everybody, to Warballoon's edition of the Big Bout Podcast. John Suntress here. I got four guys that make up most of the staff of Ringside Seat, and we're here to talk about their latest issue. I should say. I'm always used to saying episodes, and it's great to see everybody. We got Bill Detloff, Mike Kronenberg, John Stradley, and Nigel Collins. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you.
Hi, John. Good to see you.
Hello.
Long time no see, Don.
Nigel, how are you?
I'm live.
Hey, Michael Kronenberg.
This is the first time Don and I have gone face to face before. Don, how you doing?
Yeah, first time for everything. Good to see you, Michael. Bill, good evening.
Hello, Don. How are you?
I'm good. I'm
Guys,
good.
Another great issue, guys. I got to tell you, and I'm going to show Mike's covers here. So I hear my echo there.
Yeah. So the one on the left is the print edition. The one on the right is the digital edition.
That's awesome, Mike. Did you paint that?
No, that is a painting that was originally done for Sports Illustrated. They did some prints that they took this painting and they made prints out of it. They sold it. This was, I don't know, about 40 years ago, of great sports events, and it was Tunney and Dempsey.
That's supposed to be That's supposed to be Tunney and Dempsey?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Wow, that's
And
great.
You know what's interesting is that the original painting is up for sale on eBay.
No kidding. Wow. I bet that's going for a nice price.
Well, it's been up there for a long time. No one's bought it, but I think it's
I thought it was Dempsey and Dolph Lundgren.
It does look like Dolph Lundgren, doesn't it?
Well, and I know that Dempsey, was definitely a darker skinned white guy, but I mean, it really does look like a person of color rather than a Jack Dempsey. You wouldn't, whatever. I'm used to, of course, the classic Dempsey Firpo painting, and the way they're depicted in that look and everything. But it's great, and I'm such a sucker for classic illustration of boxers and paintings and stuff like that. I mean, this is when that was the era when obviously it was front page news every big fight, and certainly Dempsey Tunney. I mean, my God. I did an audio documentary back in 2002 for the 75th anniversary of that fight in particular. So
yeah, I remember I used to love the old Ted Carroll illustrations. I'm sure you guys have seen those.
Yeah, his stuff is great.
Well, I own a Ted Carroll.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah.
Of what?
It's Dick Tiger, and it's just basically his head. It's about 8x10. Anybody want to buy it?
That's pretty cool, man. That's excellent. Wow. Well, great features, guys. Again, right there on the cover, alternate realities. There have been some very interesting fights that history would definitely go a different way had the other guy won. And you guys are
your favorite, John, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. right on the cover of the print edition.
Is that Sergio Martinez on the floor?
It sure is. Yeah.
Hey, man, I love that fight. God, poor Martinez had that bum leg and was doing all he could, but I mean, had clearly had enough points to win. But, Chavez was coming on strong at the end, and it really could have ended a very different way. And of course, I couldn't help but, as Mike points out, I couldn't help but smile this weekend when Anderson Silva, 10 years older, beat the crap out of Chavez and probably should have gotten a clear cut decision. But only got a split decision on the cards for that ridiculous event.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I can only think that Junior is doing everything possible to piss his old man off. That's got to be what's at play here, right? Seriously. This kid's got some real issues with his old man. And knowing a little bit of the history from other people, I can't say that I blame him. It was one of those deals where Senior made Junior fight everybody when he was a little kid, and if he lost to somebody, he'd get his ass kicked and that kind of stuff. So he had this tortured childhood, and I'm sure he's paying his old man back for now.
Well, now I have a little more sympathy for Junior because it really seemed like his whole career was just waiting for him to grab between both Suleiman's father and son that ran the WBC, giving him every opportunity to have a title. and find a way to justify him getting a middleweight title, even though Martinez was the clear-cut champion at the time. I don't, and the guy can hit. I mean, Chavez Jr. definitely has a punch, but clearly doesn't want to train and just pissed away his prime years, and now reduced to I guess exhibitions. I mean, it was more competitive than Mayweather and Logan Paul. I didn't buy either, Bill, but I got it the way some of us are able to, virtually sneak under the door and watch a fight that we don't necessarily have to pay for.
Sure.
And, like I said, it's been ever since Martinez has beaten him. It's been a pleasure watching Chavez Jr. lose more than win. I can't deny it.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the world was Julio Jr.'s if he wanted it. Nigel, I'm sure you remember, you sent me to cover one of Jr.'s early fights at Madison Square Garden. I think it was on the undercard of a Cotto fight. I may be confusing main events and undercards, but there was a mania for Chavez Jr. that I had not seen just among the Mexican writers in press row. It was hysterical. They were, they were going after him the way the girls used to go after Oscar De La Hoya. It was hysterical. I'd never seen reporters so utterly gaga over a fighter as these guys were over Julio Jr. It was funny.
I was at a card. It was somewhere between Tucson and LA. I'm not quite sure it was. It was called a Fort something or the other. And both Mike Tyson and Jr. were there. And the crowd was much more excited about Jr. than they were Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson usually just owns the room as soon as he comes in. But it was very surprising. He wasn't fighting Jr., but he wasn't a bad fighter. I mean, he stood in there with Martinez. He knocked him down. I think after that is when he fell apart. Training, basically. He had to train for that fight. But, Bill's right. Don was right. The world was his if he wanted it.
Go ahead, Don.
I'm fascinated by the idea, and this was part of the motivation for that piece that Ronnie McCluskey did, the cover story. I'm kind of fascinated by the idea of how things would have or might have turned out differently for him, given everything that you guys just said about how loved he was. If he had been able to stop Martinez in that last round, we've all seen fights that have been stopped for less than that, right? I personally wouldn't have stopped the Martinez fight, and then a lot of refs wouldn't have. But we've all seen fights stopped for less, right?
Absolutely, man. Tyson Ruddock.
Sure.
No, you're right about that. No question.
Well, the 5 fights that Ronnie talks about, and it's a two-part article, right?
Right. Next part is in the next issue. But what would have turned out differently for Chavez if he had been able to stop Martinez in that last round? Would he be this clown now? I don't know.
I wonder if
be the middleweight champ, right?
I wonder if in the next issue, one of the fights that Ronnie covers as far as possible other outcomes would be Chavez Sr. and Meldrick Taylor. And the Richard is that one of the fights that makes sense? Yeah. And it's funny, Bill, because in the current issue, the June issue of Ringside Seat, you've got a terrific editorial at the beginning about Billy Joe Saunders quitting on Canelo Alvarez. And I appreciate your point of view. Man, I'll tell you, though, I think back to that Taylor-Chavez fight and the severity of Taylor's orbital bone fracture, and also the fact that Taylor was never the same fighter, it seems, after that, even though he won against Aaron Davis and claimed a welterweight title after that Chavez fight. And man, poor Meldrick Taylor, good Lord, it's just – I remember the rematch. I covered that fight, on that Showtime card, and that was even a fight that shouldn't have happened. But yeah, poor Meldrick. But in terms of fighters quitting, in the case of Billy Joe Saunders, I mean that's a great editorial, and it's ironic that Inoue obviously just fought this weekend, and we all remember Inoue surviving against Nonito Donaire with the same kind of injury and beating him.
Yeah, thank you for the compliment. I'd say that the difference between Saunders and Taylor, of course, is that Taylor took a bad beating, even though he was winning the fight against Chavez, right? Saunders wasn't winning, but really his injury was caused by one punch.
Right.
And I hate to question when guys come out with X-rays, but hey, Sonny Liston had a doctor show up and tell everybody how he pulled his shoulder against Cassius Clay, right? Maybe Saunders had this horrible injury. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. I didn't see. We don't know if those X-rays were his. Maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. But I guess the point of it was that everybody who you can't say anybody quit anymore because everybody freaks out about injuries, and I get that. But it's not really the question is not whether quitting is justified. The question is whether what caused a person to quit should that be enough given our standards currently, our ethical standards, to make a guy quit. And I tried to explain my point of view in that editorial that said we shouldn't necessarily hold it against a guy for quitting, or a woman, I guess, as it were, but we'll never consider them great with a few exceptions, which I noted in the editorial also.
Yeah, I thought Bill's editorial was fantastic. That part, talking about the Saunders fight, but also how he talked about Canelo and how Canelo is this rising star and is the star in boxing now.
No question. That's your top pound for pound guy. And also, God, Bill, you point out how active he's been even during this COVID year. And the fact that, I mean, going back to 19, that the guy's had 5 fights, and compare that to other guys on the pound for pound list, like Bud Crawford at welterweight, like Inoue at bantamweight. You cannot deny the activity. And even I was someone, because I really felt like Triple G won both fights.
I did too.
And feel that, like, conveniently Canelo just seems to have lost his number. And I know that there's been a difference of promoters and things like that. But yeah, it's like, come on. Well, actually, they were both under the DAZN for a while. So you'd think technically the fight could have been made.
Still both under DAZN as far
as
they?
Okay. Yeah. So but no, you're right. And truly, the guy proves it with each performance, moving up to light heavyweight. I mean, yeah, you can't stop this guy. And a much more rising in weight light heavyweight win than, say, as great as it was, Sugar Ray Leonard and Donnie Lalonde back in the day, comes to mind as far as, guys moving up in weight to challenge at light heavy and stuff. So I don't know. But and by the way, the light heavyweight division with Canelo on top of it, Bivol and why am I forgetting the Russian's name right now? The other guy.
Beterbiev.
Beterbiev. Yeah.
Canelo just wants to be great. And he's willing to do it. I think it takes to be great. A lot of guys talk about wanting to be great, but they don't. Fighting once a year or once every year and a half is not going to do it, in my view. What do you, Don and Nigel? I don't know what you guys think about Canelo or BJ Saunders in that fight. What do you guys think?
Well, I don't know. I've never had my orbital bone broken. I've been punched a few times. I don't usually question, medical things that happen to fighters in the fight. Like, for instance, a lot of people thought that Pacquiao's injury in his shoulder in the Mayweather fight was a fake. But, the doctors that allegedly performed the operation on all these fighters, I don't think that they would lie. Of course, if you give them enough money, maybe they would.
Sure.
Why would
Again, Liston had a doctor after the first Ali fight, right?
Pardon me?
Liston had a doctor examining him in front of the press after the first
Ali fight. But what happened is that it was his arm. One arm was bigger than the other. The left was bigger than the other always, and so when they said it was swollen up, I think there's difference between Sonny Liston, who the fight was under a lot of scrutiny, and what happened to Saunders. I remember a long time ago, was a fighter quit. Can't remember who it was. Afino, the guy from Brazil. What's his name?
Acelino Freitas.
Yeah, he quit in a fight, and I wrote an editorial about it. And I said that quitting in a fight where you're getting beaten up doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you less of a fighter. And I think there's a big difference between
I agree.
That's that's what Bill's saying in his editorial, and that's true. With Pacquiao and Mayweather, what bothered me was my thoughts went back to the Rumble in the Jungle and Ali and Foreman when Foreman had the cut over his eye, and it's like, fine, postpone the fight. Yeah, it sucks, but let's have an honest fight with these guys. And if Pacquiao knew, and maybe I'm misremembering in the case of Pacquiao, but it almost was like, well, he was going into the fight with a hurt arm. It's like then postpone.
Yeah, everybody's got an injury after the loss.
Yep.
And not everybody. How many fighters you hear? I wasn't 100%.
Right.
After it's the best camp I've ever had, and in the loss, I had this or that injury. And if you're not gonna believe most guys, then don't believe Pacquiao or whatever, whoever it is.
That said, and God, I'm so excited for what's coming up this summer with Errol Spence and Pacquiao, August 21st. And I know I said this before when we were all together. Goddamn, Pacquiao is like the second coming of Sugar Ray Robinson in the later part of his career. Being 40 years old and doing as well as he continues to do. I really thought that Australian loss was a home country job. Frankly, I thought he did enough to win. I thought he did enough to win against Tim Bradley back in the day as well. With that one decisions that Tim Bradley got over Pacquiao.
The first fight was a really bad. When the winner turns up at the press conference in a wheelchair, he didn't win the damn fight. I had more. I dashed off a couple of tweets about how it was a ripoff, and I had more response to that than any tweet I've ever done. It was amazing the number of tweets and likes and whatever that disagreed with the Bradley decision. And I think deep in his heart, probably Bradley did too. Because the second and third fight, they were good fights, but there was no question that Manny had won.
But again, and going back to that alternate realities column, sometimes fate isn't with you. And Marco Antonio Barrera's knockout of Pacquiao was just stunning.
Well, the alternate realities is about their first fight.
Oh, that's right. Pardon me.
Yeah, and it's about their first fight. And what if it had ended when Pacquiao, knocked down
Marquez, Pacquiao and Marquez.
Oh, and Raul Marquez. Sure. Okay. All right. And I'm right. Barrera, though, later and moving up a couple divisions himself, scored that knockout of Pacquiao's that was so
stunning, it's right? Marquez.
It was always Marquez. All right.
Yeah, see? Pacquiao beat Barrera twice.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
The first Barrera fight was maybe one of Pacquiao's greatest fights.
Yeah, he was all.
Nobody was really expecting that because Barrera was on top of his game, and it was finally it was the corner that stopped it. They jumped in the ring in the middle of Pacquiao beating him up. As far as Pacquiao is concerned, as Bill knows, I'm a Pacquiao fan. Not of the person, but as the fighter, for a number of reasons. He always comes to knock the other guy the hell out. That's always his plan, whether he does it or not. That's what he wants to do. He doesn't pussyfoot around. I can only think of maybe one or two bad fights that he was in. The one where the other guy was disqualified. I like fighters that go for broke. Yes, he's adapted his style, obviously. But he's a guy that's been successful in everything he tries. And that's why I think he's doing it for the money, of course, but he's got an election coming up and he's going to need a lot of money to bribe everybody. But the thing is, he's the most interesting fighter I've ever covered because of all the auxiliary things that he does, rather than just being a fighter. So it gives a journalist a hell of a lot to write about.
I hear you.
Do you guys think he has a chance against Spence, or do you think Spence is too young and quick for the 42-year-old version of Pacquiao?
I bow to the experts first, and then I'll say something.
Well, obviously Spence is going to be the betting favorite, I don't know how big it's going to be, how long the odds are going to be. I didn't think he'd beat Crawford.
I think
a lot of people were that way. I know Bill was hoping Crawford would win, but Bill told us that when Manny got in the ring, the look on his face told Bill right away, Crawford was going to lose. You know,
You mean, hold on, not Crawford.
yeah, sorry.
Thurman.
Not Porter. Damn it, Keith Thurman.
Thurman,
Yeah,
right.
Thurman, yeah.
I'm almost as bad as you, John, getting these.
No, I was going to say I had to redeem myself from my Barrera mistake. Absolutely, man. No, and that's what
I
I'm
think.
saying.
You know, Pacquiao's the sort of guy they always say, well, the guy's always got one great fight left in him. Maybe Thurman was it.
I don't know how anybody can pick Pacquiao.
There's something. I've heard fighters talk about various opponents, and when they get in the ring with them, there's something changes. Oh my God, that's Evander Holyfield over there in the other corner. You know, you used to hear that about him. You know, oh my God, it's Mike Tyson. But hey, I think in the smaller weight classes, oh my God, that's really Pacquiao. So I give him a chance. I'm not betting any money on him. This could be the end. But what you got to say is he's got the balls to do that. And that's what I was talking about before. He's a real fighter. Whether you like him or not, whether you like his politics or not, or his religion, he's a real fighter. And we don't see too many of those. Not at the top level. You know,
You're right.
You can pick and choose in. Manny will fight whoever will bring the most money, period. He doesn't care who they are.
You're right. And there aren't a lot of guys like that. Holyfield, since you mentioned him, is one of those guys, or was one of those guys, right? And I think that was the difference between Pacquiao and Thurman. Like, Thurman's like a fighter, and he's a flute player, and he's this, and he's that. And Pacquiao's a fighter and like this not a half-ass politician, but he's mostly just fighter, right? He's in the common vernacular, he's a real one. And Thurman ain't really a real one, right? And anybody who isn't a real one, Pacquiao's going to beat. I kind of think Spence is almost a real one, but between being almost a real one and younger and stronger and all that stuff, he certainly would be my pick. But I wouldn't be shocked if Pacquiao beat him. I wouldn't be shocked. What do you think, Dom?
Wake up, Donald.
I always think, youth will prevail at some point, but I've been wrong for a bunch of my past picks. So
we all have.
I'm not gonna put myself out there on this one. I think youth will prevail, but Pacquiao's always got something going on.
Sure.
I knew he was going to beat Thurman, kind of the way what Bill was saying. Before the fight, I don't know if you remember, they went into the dressing rooms to show what each guy was doing. Pacquiao was, shadow boxing and looking mean. Thurman was getting a massage. And I thought, all right, that shows you a lot. Pacquiao's going to win this one. But speed though, Spence's speed concerns me a little for the older guy. That could be an issue. But Pacquiao has proven me wrong in the past.
Did Spence?
I'm like Nigel. I'm fascinated by Pacquiao.
Did Spence start boxing young? Because that, I think, is another thing in Pacquiao's favor. And I think, too, to even recent fights like Andy Ruiz and Joshua the first time around, where a lot of these fighters, kind of come to the sport second after basketball, football, whatever it is, baseball, converted athletes. And I wonder sometimes if that's where the old vet, having done it for so long, just knows various things, knows where to put himself, isn't thinking about punches. Muscle memory is really taking over how they go into the ring and, how they perform and stuff like that. And God, we just saw it. And now is it Rosado that had that grand upset this weekend against the kid?
That was the best thing about last weekend.
35 years old, 13 losses. It's like, yeah, guess what, man? All I did was learn my skill and my wins and my losses, and just that picture-perfect uppercut and everything to shut down that kid. And that kid will be fine. He'll come back, I'm sure, if he's a real fighter.
I thought Rosado was very interesting in the post-fight comment. How they always ask him, well, how did you do it? He told them the real truth. He said he noticed when the other guy was coming in, it was easy to land a right to the body. And he thought, well, this time I'm going to throw to the head. And, he just moved it up a little bit and bingo. The little victory dance he did was really funny. He had his hands in here like this and was dancing around like he was pissing his pants. But he was happy, man.
It was a great upset. And really, God, Saturday was like the most satisfying boxing day in God only knows how many years. And, COVID only aged us more, although boxing survived in general pretty well during the COVID year. Yep. And I think managed to, give us good entertainment while a lot of the other sports really had to kind of, reposition themselves in a lot of different ways. But, there was, good Lord, we had that. And, Charlo, I give Montiel, his opponent, credit for hanging in there. But that was a one-sided fight. But goddamn Inoue and more precision punching, that shot to the liver a round or two before he got the knockout and stuff, clearly was bothering the other guy for the remainder of the fight and everything, and had just as much to do with him stopping as did the final blows.
Yeah, between the shows on DAZN and Showtime and ESPN last weekend, or to just Saturday, I guess, a lot of good fights.
Yeah,
it's been a very good quarter, I'd say, for boxing, and especially on Showtime. The last 3 shows have all featured really good, exciting, hotly contested fights. They're really doing a great job. I guess it's Ron Katz and who's the other guy? But Bruce Trampler, both those Top Rank guys who are with working for Top Rank and Top Ranks with Showtime, putting on some really good fights. What's that, Nigel?
I think there's a guy called Goodman who's the matchmaker with
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all really good fights on Showtime lately. And again, last weekend was especially good.
And speaking of Showtime, they had that great Kings documentary that was great, and I really appreciated Eric Raskin's piece in the latest issue, comparing the 80s welterweight and middleweight eras of Leonard Duran and Hagler and Hearns to again going back to Eric Morales and Marco Antonio Pereira, Manny Pacquiao. That was a great era as well, and yes, he called them the Four Warriors. I'm forgetting who was Ringo in that.
Marquez.
Thank you. That's Raul Marquez, of course, once again. And must have like a blind spot when it comes to
I was thinking that.
Clearly. I'll talk to my psychiatrist about that. But no, it's great because really that was kind of my last go around covering boxing regularly and going to Vegas and New York and all the big venues, AC and the like and everything, and covering big fights. And talking to George Foreman about how much he loves Eric Morales. And it was such a pleasure because it wasn't happy cheeseburger eating George. It was, oh, you really want to know my opinion? Here you go. And it was great. I mean, that's the thing. I always say, George is entertaining on TV, but if you wanted a good, analysis from an ex-fighter and stuff, George knew what he was talking about. He had great things to say about, even though he was wrong when it came to Morales and Pereira, it was like, no, man, I want to know what you think. So it was always good. What a great article.
We hadn't heard from Michael the pick for the Pacquiao Spence fight.
Oh yeah, please.
Oh, yeah. What do you think, Michael?
I got to pick Spence. I think, and I am a fan of Pacquiao, like Nigel. Although his piece about Pacquiao politically that he shared with me several years ago really opened up my eyes about him even more. So, got to separate the boxer from the person. Don't particularly like the person, but I think Spence, even though I'm not sure about Spence since the car accident,
Yep.
He was so fantastic beforehand. I don't know if that had any effect or has any effect on him. But I still think he, along with Terrence Crawford, are the top welterweights. So I don't know. And like Don said, speed, it's like, how is Pacquiao is known for speed. How is Pacquiao going to be able to deal with that speed? But, you never know. I mean, with Pacquiao.
He's not slow himself,
Huh?
Pacquiao's not slow.
Right.
Oh, no, he's very speed, but he's also 40 years old. I mean, time catches up to everybody.
You're right. And
He's not as fast. He's not as fast as he was, 10 years ago.
Oh, neither am I.
Right. Exactly.
But I could potentially see him setting a trap that Spence might fall into. And Spence better take him seriously. It's just, that is the main thing, is to take him seriously and not think of him as a 42-year-old man, but to think of him potentially as dangerous as Manny Pacquiao can be.
40 is the new 30. I mean, that's the way it is. You think about what Sugar Ray Robinson was when he was 40, and you think about what a fighter like Pacquiao is when he's 40 right now. It's a big difference.
But I see the similarity more so in terms of experience. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of thinking this Spence Pacquiao fight is almost a Fulmer Robinson kind of matchup, where certainly Fulmer's the younger fighter and stuff. But, you know, I mean, obviously you had the fifth round knockout the first time I think they fought. But then even that last time they fought for the WBA or the NBA middleweight title, and that was, I've watched that film. It's a close fight. And I think Fulmer wins, but again, Robinson gave him all he could handle. And also, I just love the fact that Robinson closed out his career fighting Joey Archer, the number one middleweight contender at the time, and having those wars in the late 50s and through the early 60s against top competition. I don't know.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, and as you said, it's been a great first quarter of boxing. The summer looks incredible with some of these matchups, and obviously, I mean, I'm actually, as much as I was looking forward to Fury and Joshua, I'm okay for a third Wilder fight. That's going to be exciting. I think that could potentially, and again, comparing it to old fights, it's possible that might be another Hagler-Hearns, because Wilder has no choice but to go for it, and I think go for it early, because I think Fury's got his number. And the one thing Wilder still has going into this fight is his power. But who's to say? And he better be ready. It honestly, any conclusion, I believe Fury will win again. But I do think that Wilder always has that puncher's chance.
That's a good point of view. Nothing would surprise me as long, but any way you cut it, I see Fury winning. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Wilder knocked him down 4 times and Fury won somehow, right? It's one of those scenarios.
Sure.
But getting back to go ahead, Don.
I was going to say I thought Wilder was going to take the second fight just based on how hard he hit him in the first fight, nearly KO'd him. I thought he can do it. He can knock Fury out if he steps on the gas. You know, he can't wait till the last round like he did in the first fight. But if he comes out swinging, he can take it. But he wore the heavy costume into the ring, and that was
what I was going to say.
That's where it all changed.
40-pound costume. That damn 40-pound costume.
That's one of the fights that Ronnie discusses in that second part too. By the way, is if only Wilder hadn't worn that 40-pound costume before the rematch, how might things have played out differently for Wilder and Fury?
I hope Wilder's learned how to punch in the
Wilder can't fight backing up.
What's that, Nigel?
He can't fight backing up.
Interesting, sure.
And that's what Fury's got to do. It's what he did the second fight. He took it to him. And I don't know, you see the training films of Wilder punching the hell out of the bag or the mitts or something like that, or doing some strength and exercise. I didn't see him practicing backing up. But, of course, they could be doing that in secret. But I don't think that's part of his brain to back up.
I think you're right. Yeah.
If Fury can back him up, he's going to win again.
That's
it. I'm sorry. If we could touch again real briefly on Eric's column, John,
please.
Comparing the 4 kings and what he calls the 4 warriors. I think my favorite point that Eric makes in comparing and contrasting these two groups is that the 4 kings, they fought at a time when the exposure was much greater than it was for Barrera, Marquez, Morales, and Pacquiao. And that probably accounts for how they're remembered, right? More so than the latter guys. Maybe also that the latter guys are all Mexican. Maybe that's got something to do with it also. And the 4 kings are all, except for Duran, American. But I think the exposure and the relative size of the sport at that time had a lot to do with it too. So that might be a good segue to talk about. I assume everybody here has seen the 4 Kings documentary?
Yet.
No, you didn't see it yet, Nigel?
Really nice. Wow.
No, I haven't watched it.
Okay, it's very good. I highly recommend it. Have
I'm
you seen
sure
it,
it is good, but I probably won't watch it.
Nigel, you probably felt that the way that I did when the film Moneyball came out, because I was working at a national sports network at the time, and I'm like, I don't need to see the movie. I lived that story day to day. And it was just like, why don't you see, and then I saw the movie and I'm like, oh, actually, this is very good.
I covered my second trip to Vegas, it was Hearns Duran. Wow. I was back for Hagler and Hearns and Hagler and Leonard. I covered Duran's fight down the shore when he beat Barkley. I mean, I'm sure it's a great documentary. I'm not knocking it in any way. It's sort of like, say you've got a favorite band or singer or something, and you've seen him 2 or 3 times. I want to see somebody new.
Sure.
And that's kind of how I feel about watching that, plus the fact that I was there for much of it. And I don't want to take away from the experiences and the things I felt at those fights.
Sure.
Because they're so special to me.
One of the things I liked about it was, I don't know if you guys know, but I've never been a Leonard fan. And the producers really go out of their way to villainize Leonard. Really. Leonard comes off like such a jackass, which I think is probably accurate. And really, they relate him very strongly to Ronald Reagan, right, which is also fun, who also was a jackass, of course. So that part I really enjoyed.
I loved what Bill's saying. And another point I wanted to bring up that Bill talked about on a Twitter tweet before was that what's great about it is that they don't flash over to talking heads, that all of the voiceovers are coming with film footage, and the way the director and the editors mingled in the whole political spectrum and what was going on politically in the current events, I thought was fantastic. So it was great not going away to this, talking head talking about this stuff. It was mostly just these guys, just hearing the fighters talk over this footage. I thought that was great.
Yeah, and really, for the record, Michael, that was a guy wrote that to me. I didn't tweet that. That was in response to something I wrote. So I probably agree with the point, though. I don't want to take credit for it, though. But on that note, you guys can continue with that, and it might be a good segue for Don to talk about something he's got coming up. But I have to drop off.
Okay, Bill.
You guys have fun and continue discussion about the Four Kings or whatever, and whatever Don has coming up. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. Thanks for having me on, John.
Bill, as always, I appreciate you coming on. Take care, man. Great seeing you.
Take it easy, guys. So long.
There you go. And then there were 4. I wanted to point out the in the Kings documentary, as Bill said, I remember Irving. Wasn't it Irving Rudd, the old publicity man? I read his book. And his chapter on Leonard started, "The boy next door is a prick." And it was all about the facade of Sugar Ray Leonard and the real man and stuff. And I thought that was very interesting.
Well, I want us to also make sure we get to, Don wants to talk about his book, but we want to talk about Don's article in Ringside Seat about Chuck Wiggins.
Yes.
And Nigel's piece in the new issue about Sonny Banks, both of which are fantastic pieces.
Couldn't agree more, man. Absolutely. So yeah, Don, let's start with you, and we're gonna end up coming back to you because I also bought your book about Boston boxing. So,
oh my goodness,
Boston, absolutely. Oh no, it's fantastic, man. But please, let's start about your piece. Tell us who Chuck Wiggins was.
Oh, Chuck Wiggins, my goodness. Well, first of all, isn't it such a dark issue? It seems like every story in there has some kind of murder or bad ending, It's a dark issue.
Sharp's article also. We ought to touch on that at some.
Sure,
it's a dark issue, and I mentioned that to Bill. And he said it just turned out that way,
It's our noir issue. It's our noir issue.
Exactly.
So. Well, Wiggins was a character that I read about a long time ago. I used to be really fascinated by all of the, misfits in boxing, as I'm sure a lot of people are. I know Nigel wrote Boxing Babylon, and he covered a lot of, the dark side. And it's just something you can always latch onto in boxing, a lot of dark stories. But Chuck Wiggins was a guy that I had read about years ago, and I always thought he was a character that deserved some coverage. He fought everybody from the 1920s to the 1930s. There wasn't anybody he didn't fight. Harry Greb, Tiger Flowers, Gene Tunney. He fought everybody from middleweight to heavyweight. Wow. He was just a journeyman. He started out with a lot of promise, but he got busted for attacking some underage girl, and he did some time in prison. And when he came out, New York wouldn't book him. He couldn't get booked at Madison Square Garden because he had this reputation, and apparently he had some seedy friends who were usually in his vicinity. So New York just wouldn't hire the guy. So he ended up fighting everywhere but Madison Square Garden, mostly in the South, California, Australia. And by the time his career was over, he was just a down and out alcoholic, probably with some brain damage and some hallucinations, some paranoia. He ended up walking the streets of Indianapolis, where he was from, and one morning he was discovered at the bottom of a stairway. He'd either he'd been pushed or he fell, or he jumped. No one. The official verdict was that he fell, but the folklore said that there may have been more to it than anyone knew about. But to me, he was, one of the many misfits who ended up in a bad way. A funny guy at times. Some of his pranks when he was drunk were pretty funny. But just one of many stories in boxing. What was the name of that old show? There's 1,000 stories in the
Naked City.
Yeah. That's what boxing is like. He's just one of those stories. Chuck Wiggins.
No,
and I'm glad I got a chance to write about him.
Well, and we're going to come back to your Boston book in a second, but I do want to talk about Nigel's amazing article about Sonny Banks, best known as a tough Ali competitor very early in both of their careers, and you cover that fight quite well. But good Lord, the poor guy had a hell of a finish, and again, I'll let Nigel tell the story.
Well, to start with, I was reluctant to write it when Bill suggested it to me. And he twisted my arm a little bit, and I'm glad he did. I knew the basics. I had seen the Ali fight on TV live, and I knew that the Otis Martin fight was here in Philadelphia, but I wasn't there. And the problem is that virtually everybody who was connected to that fight is dead. Obviously the fighters, the referee, the judges, and there wasn't a big crowd there, about 1,200 people. But I managed to cobble it together from newspaper clips and stuff like that. And then I discovered one of my best friends was actually at the fight, Jeff Jowett. And his quote was fantastic. Basically, Sonny was a good guy. And he moved north because he lived in Mississippi, and there wasn't much for him there. And so he ended up in Detroit and working the Ford plant. And these two very rich guys sponsored him. And Sonny understood after a while that he wasn't as good as, he said something about like, I never knew somebody who was so good in the gym could be so bad in the fight. And then later in his career, he said that all those easy knockouts were bad for me. So he knew what was going on. But he regrouped at one point and won 8 out of 9. And then the 9th fight, he beat the guy, knocked him out, who had won the one fight out of that 9. And he was slowly getting better. But they went from fighting decent journeyman to fighting Cleveland Williams. And that really ruined him. I mean, the quotes from Cleveland Williams in that story are very, very telling. He said at one point, I thought I was going to kill him. He doesn't know why the management sent him out for that next round. The Texas Commission told the Michigan Commission, which is where Sonny Banks was living and licensed, he shouldn't fight for 6 months.
Wow.
One of the guys that were sponsored him, a guy called Ewald, tried to appeal that at the commission. And he lost the case. And he came back and fought Leotis Martin in about 8 months, I think, after the Cleveland Williams fight. And I don't know how well they scouted Leotis Martin, But you look at his record, you might not think he's that great of a fighter. But his right hand punch was one of the best. He just had that punch. And he was a guy that was sort of, looking for openings, looking for traps, And it was a great fight. It went from like what people were there were like out of their minds on their feet screaming to suddenly this pole coming over the place when he didn't get up. And I spent a lot of time trying to find people. And I finally tracked down the son of Ewald. Ewald's name was Edward. He was just from a rich family. He once owned a piece of the Detroit Pistons. And the other guy was a Harvard-educated tax lawyer who, seemed to be the better of the two. But why did they go suddenly like to kamikaze style and fight Cleveland Williams, who already had 50 knockouts by then, with this guy that they know who had been fighting basically German? I give several different reasons it might have happened, to be fair, but I think they were trying to recoup the money and cash out. And poor Sonny, he was a victim, and he sort of began to understand that, but he didn't want to spend the rest of his life, at the foundry for the Ford, hammering out crap. He wanted more than that in life. And he thought that boxing was the only way he could do it. And we all know what happened. And was a real tragedy. I think that he could have been better if they had continued, because he had no amateur fights whatsoever. If they had continued to bring him along slowly, gradually step up the competition. But to go from a guy who was almost 500, a little bit over 500, to Cleveland Williams, for crying out loud. So it was I guess, we say it's the dark issue. I think he was a victim in more ways than one.
And I'm glad you had that postscript as well, a little box and a few hundred words about Leotis Martin.
Yes.
Because Leotis Martin is another name from that era that I knew best as the guy who, kind of put the lid on Sonny Liston. I mean, yeah, he still had the Wepner fight after that, but really, Sonny, much like Sonny Banks, had amassed a bunch of wins and was in that WBA heavyweight eliminator tournament.
He got cut, yeah.
And also, again, I was hoping to see, there is the Banks Ali fight you can see on YouTube, and you got a great Don Dunphy call of the fight, I believe. It's I was looking for the Leotis.
It's not there, and this is my segue into talking about how you're not going to get what you get from articles like that Don writes and continues to write, and what Nigel does. You're not going to get that anywhere else except for Ringside Seat. I mean,
you are so right, Mike.
It's just, and the other thing is that these two guys, and especially Don, really is a challenge for me as a designer to find photos. You know how hard it was for me to find photos of
the next one. I love that hand though.
Yeah, how did you?
And same with Sonny Banks, man. It was really, really tough. I luckily was able to find a photo of Leotis Martin visiting Sonny Banks at the hospital when he was in a coma.
Wow.
One little thing about Leotis Martin. Before he fought Sonny Liston, he had a fight at the Blue Horizon, which I was there. He fought a guy called Wendell Newton, who was a pretty good fighter, but nothing great. And I think that's the fight where he got the detached retina, because his eye really swelled up in that fight, and Liston didn't nail him that often, Leotis was in that fight to win, and he was doing really well before the knockout. Sonny was doing the best he could, but I think actually he got the detached and the tune-up against Wendell Newton. A few people know that, but that's what I think happened. Because very often in those days and even earlier, if something like that happened to a guy that, back then there was no surgery for detached retinas. When would have a big fight coming up, even knowing he had the bad eye, because he needed the money.
Sure.
And, obviously Otis Martin, he was a very good fighter, but, he never broke into the $1 million ranks or anything like that. And, he was sort of a sad figure himself, because if he hadn't got a detached retina, he would have probably got a fight with Joe Frazier, a crosstown rivalry. They would have filled up any arena in Philadelphia for that. That's what they love, crosstown fighters.
You bet.
And, I think that he went into that fight knowing this might be the last thing, but
wow.
He got caught. And so who knows? Either way, Otis Martin had to stop fighting.
Two sad stories, and again, brilliantly written by Nigel. And Don, again, this Chuck Wiggins article, that's one thing. And I'm so glad. I was like, I got to see what else Don has been writing lately. And I'm so glad that I picked up Slaughter in the Streets here, as it says in the sunset. Well, it's my pleasure, man, because I'm halfway through it. I'm not finished. I'm literally on the 7th chapter. You'll forgive me. But it really was like, oh, hey, Don's coming on tomorrow. I'm like, oh, great. Let me find stuff and everything. And I started reading this. It's excellent. And I mean, really, man, I'm based here in Chicago. I've lived here all my life. Dad and my grandfather, massive fight fans. Dad knew Rocky Capuano, Lukey Capuano's dad. And so in the 70s, we paid attention to Lukey when he was fighting at light heavyweight and fighting guys like Mike Rossman and stuff like that. And I covered boxing here in the city for our all sports station, The Score, and a little bit of TV here and there, cable TV, but wrote for Bert Sugar for several years for Boxing Illustrated. So Boston reminds me a lot in Boston's history. Although Chicago was definitely an international boxing club city, it was very interesting to read the contrast that you kind of point out in the book, but also the fact that the main guys were still kind of working with Frankie Carbo and stuff. So no, fascinating history. And as you point out in the book, you're talking about a lot of guys that weren't contenders, but were regular fighters in the Boston scene from the 20s, through the 60s and that. So I'm really enjoying the book, but yeah, please talk more about it.
Oh yeah. Boston, sadly, it was long before my time, but I imagine that it was a bit like Philadelphia. It had its own vibe, its own scene, its own fighters. And it was all long before my time. So I got here when Peter McNeely was the star. And but apparently years ago, it was a thriving boxing city. But it was really cut off from the IBC cities. And I tried to figure out why, the IBC had their hooks in a lot of other cities. And from what I could tell, Boston was just, even the mafia wasn't that interested in Boston. It was like, yeah, you guys can, handle your own stuff. You're not big enough for us to even bother with, So Boston had its own little mob scene and its own little boxing scene. And it just seemed that during the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, all the kids from the same high schools were either becoming boxers or they were joining the local hoodlum sect, and they all knew each other. And when a guy's boxing career ended, he would say, well, my buddy's making money as a doorman at a mafia club. I can work there. And before you know it, these old middleweights are working for the mob as a driver or a bodyguard and a lot of them ended up getting slaughtered in the streets, which is why I titled the book that. It's a strange book. I wasn't sure about it. My publisher loves all the Boston folklore, and we were having drinks one night, and he said, there might be something there. At first, I was just going to write maybe one story. And then one story led to another story, and I called him, and I said, I've got about 20 stories that I could weave together as kind of a history of, the Boston mob and its involvement in the Boston fight scene. The only problem was that the fighters are all very obscure. You don't really know these guys. They weren't big names. So that's why I would try to bring in, Willie Pep comes in for one chapter. Muhammad Ali comes in and fights an exhibition with one of these guys. So I tried to bring in famous figures, so the average fight fan might recognize a few of these names.
Tony DeMarco, a big part of your book too.
DeMarco was part of the book, and Joe DiNucci, was very helpful because he knew a lot of the bad guys and never liked to let on that he knew the bad guys, but he knew them. And I have a funny story about DiNucci. I got to know him a little bit, and I wrote a story about him once for The Ring when Nigel was the editor, and we became kind of friendly after that. And some time went by, and I said, Joe, someday I want to talk to you about, some of the mob guys that you knew. And he was like, well, yeah, come by for lunch tomorrow. I'll get some Chinese food, and we'll talk about it. So I showed up, and, I brought a little tape recorder, one of those little portable jobs. And I sat down, and he had actually ordered Chinese food. His PR guy comes in, who was a nice guy, and he sees my tape recorder, and he says, turn that off. Turn that off. Because he was working at the State House at the time. Joe DiNucci became a politician. He was the state auditor. He was working at the Massachusetts State House. And the PR guy says, you're not going to tape record this conversation. Turn that off. And I looked at the PR guy and I said, don't worry, it's all going to be up here. And so Joe told me everything. And I remembered it all. I was taking notes, and the PR guy was in the corner of the room with his arms folded, like thinking, oh, this is going to be a disaster if it ever comes out. But Joe DiNucci told me some pretty good stories, nothing too incriminating. But they're in the book, and they're kind of interesting. I think they come later than chapter 7, where you said you had left off.
Okay. Yeah. I'm still.
I'm glad you like the book.
40s and 50s.
Yeah, I'm glad you like the book. I also did a couple of others. I did a little bio of Monzon, which I'm rather proud of. I didn't think you could really say much more about Monzon, but I had a good time writing the Monzon book. And I did a book on Edwin Valero a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And coming out in September, I'm sure you've seen this. Can you see it?
There you go.
It's by our friend Amanda Kelly. This is the original painting that she did for the cover. She's a great artist. I think she uses mirrors or magnifying glasses or something. She uses some kind of trickery to get so realistic. But that's the cover of my Hagler Hearns book, which is coming out in September. I don't know if the King's documentary will help or hurt sales, but maybe it's like an infomercial and it will help people get interested in the book. I don't know.
Well, you're definitely welcome back in September to talk about that book, because again,
that would be nice.
No, that era is amazing. And no, I also want to talk to you about film noir and classic Hollywood and more about this crime stuff that you do. Nigel, I wonder, and especially reading Don's book, because he touches on both that period before and after the TV contracts of the late 40s came in. That really did, in a lot of ways, as much as the exposure might have helped nationally, it really did kill all these local cities having regular weekly fight clubs. I mean, Philly was obviously a great exception, and thank God for it, where we got all this great fights that Russell Peltz and the like were able to continue to match.
Bobby Cassidy wrote a great piece in Ringside Seat about all the fight clubs and what happened to them. He talks about not only their heyday, but their demise of all those. That's a great piece.
Yeah, and again, Chicago felt it too, and I was reminded of in New York, St. Nicholas, and the Eastern. Is it Eastern Parkway? Was the other New York venue with the garden and everything, and
gardens too.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So and it's funny too. I keep researching at newspapers.com and other sources to see how fights were covered then. and a lot of no decisions and hometown decisions might have caused a week of, hey, that didn't look like a right, result. But by the next week, that was old news, and they were on to the next newspaper stories of the day and didn't follow the scrutiny. In a lot of ways, it was, I think, the TV fights that maybe brought on things like the Kefauver Commission and the heavier scrutiny of boxing in terms of what was going on. And I don't know, again, as the, you'll forgive me, the elder statement, your thoughts of all this.
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, I think the mob's still involved in boxing, especially that Irishman, who will go unnamed because I don't want to be sued, who's now living in Saudi Arabia, has over 200 fighters, including Fury, who he's an advisor. Allegedly, this is a money laundering scheme because he runs a big drug organization, drug cartel, and boxing's a great way to launder money. It's a cash business.
Yep.
I think there's been some shows that I've been to in Philadelphia that was doing that. So I don't think the mob has ever gone away. I think they've changed their tactics. They've got to go. They've tried to get into a lot of legitimate businesses. Of course, that's not boxing, but other businesses like when Atlantic City opened up to the casino gambling, the mob got the contract for the laundry for all the casinos. So they haven't gone away. Let's put it that way.
The vending machines. I mean, the coin-operated machines, and now they're obviously not coins anymore. But I know that obviously was a big influence in boxing.
The Garment District in New York and the garbage, they were all controlled by the mob. I haven't worked in Manhattan since the 80s, but they were in control then. So I don't think things have changed. I think the tactics have changed. We've seen so many bad decisions that had to be influenced.
Nigel, and I made this point to the other, and Don too, and Mike's heard this. Sorry, Mike, for the broken record, but every time there's a draw, like we saw on even Saturday, in fact, I'm always like, you would solve this problem very easily if you went back to an odd number of rounds. And I mean, maybe 13 is unlucky. Fine, make championship fights 11 rounds. But I really do think the fact that you're dealing with 12 rounds for championship fights, you're going to get draws. And then there's nothing more annoying from a fan standpoint, and I'm sure from a journalist standpoint as well, in seeing a hard-fought fight and not having a winner. I don't think it's a good idea after they've cooled down, as they used to, I believe, in the USBA, come back for a round to
it was the IBF. I think it was a while when they were first starting out that if it was a draw, they would go one more round.
Yeah. That's dangerous.
A lot of it is not outright fraud amongst the judges and the referees, but you have to notice that if it's close or even if it's bad decision, it's always the house fighter that gets the benefit of the doubt. And that's not a coincidence. People would ask me, how do you beat Floyd Mayweather? Now, that's going to be tough, I said, you got to get a referee who won't let him clinch all the time.
Sure.
And it was jab. The first half of his career was fantastic. He was a real fighter then.
Amazing.
And he's smart. He saw what happened to his uncle, probably his father as well, and other people around him.
Yep.
And I don't blame him, but I don't want to see it, So I happen to know what Floyd does that's illegal, but I can't prove it, so I can't tell you. I'll tell you off the record at some point. So the house fighter always gets I was over in the Philippines in 2019, and we went to a show in Manila that was actually promoted by Manny Pacquiao. And on the way out with my friends, we ran into a couple of guys who were boxing judges, Filipino boxing judges. And they came up to us and started talking. And they were basically bragging oh, we get these free trips, we get to go all over, they give us money, they give us whores. I mean, I was surprised. You wouldn't hear that in the United States, but those guys were so proud about that. You know, I'm like, let's get out of here, you know. So yeah.
Well, Nigel, you wrote that piece about the Triple G Canelo fight and talked about the judges and how the judges are comped for stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true. That was I think, forget, it was a touch of something. It wasn't a touch of evil, a touch of larceny, I call it.
Touch of larceny, right.
And it just comes right out and tells what it is. It's been a while now. I can't remember all the details, but yeah, I do remember writing that. And I tell you something, Michael, nobody else would have published that.
There you go. Ringside Seat.
That's true for a lot of things that we've done. And that for me, of course, I like the money. I like people reading my stuff and all that stuff. But I've worked for a lot of boxing publications over the years. I've edited a lot of them over the years. And there's a lot of stuff that we've done together, Michael, that none of the other outlets would let me do it. I mean, at ESPN, there were certain words you couldn't use. Ring was always scared to death they were going to be sued. You know, there was different reasons for it. But I have the freedom that I've never had in almost 50 years of boxing writing, thanks to Michael and everybody else that works on it.
You know, honestly, man, when Michael made me aware of Ringside Seat, I was so excited because it's this kind of honest journalism that I've missed. And listen, I understand, much like the fights themselves, there are house fighters. There are house networks now, DAZN, Top Rank with ESPN, and Showtime with its PBC, and Fox with its PBC relationships. And it really disappoints me. And Mike and Mike, as always, have to apologize for the amount of texts I send you during fight nights where I'm just
it's fun. It's fun.
I hate everything that these commentators are saying.
Well, everybody knows my hatred for Joe Tessitore. I think that's well known out on Twitter.
Well, I tell you something. I worked with Joe Tessitore. He's a real dick.
There you go, right there.
That's the truth,
Nigel.
I mean, you know, there were other people there at ESPN that were really nice, especially the executive producer, Matt Sanduli.
Okay.
Probably the best, you know, executive that I've ever worked for. But yeah, I mean, I can do stuff now I could never do before, and
that's great.
And yeah, I was the guy that was the most negative when we had the meeting to decide to do it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it was Eddie Muller and Nigel who helped me kind of like get this going and get this started. But I have to say that both of them thought it would fail miserably, that we would fall on our faces and fail. But here we are, we're still going. And thank you, Nigel. I appreciate that. But it wouldn't be what this is without writers like Don, Nigel, and without Bill being the editor. And I mean, all the pieces. I hope we can go over some of the other pieces that are in this issue. But you know, we have, you know, book reviews and movie reviews also, and Don's done some movie reviews for us also. We have a good piece by Wally Matthews on Gil Clancy's life.
And
well aware, and there's
a great quote in there about what we were just talking about, judging.
Okay, go on.
He said, you get 3 schoolboys around the ring, and when it's over, they'll tell you who won, and there won't be any more bad decisions. And that's a great quote. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I know, but and you got to respect Gil Clancy.
Oh yeah, my favorite quote from Wally's piece was that he points out, and one of the reasons why I bring up the commentators now is these guys, and Tessitore is one of these guys. Morrow, and I never remember Morrow's last name because he drives me nuts the way that Tessitore drives Michael nuts. But literally this weekend, he said, he's weathering the storm like a parka. And I'm like, fuck you. Nobody would have come up with that on the top of your head. You wrote that 3 days ago. And frankly, I see that a lot in today's TV commentators, both ringside and with weekly shows that might be on a certain network, ESPN.
They're all salesmen these days.
They're
Yeah,
salesmen.
it's
Exactly what
exactly
Nigel
what they
had said
understand.
that to me years ago. He said, I'm watching this stuff, and it's like they're selling the fighters. Nigel wrote a really great piece also about it was after the Canelo, the second time he won, Nigel.
Triple G.
Yeah, and it was he won the story of the fight, which
he's
was
winning the story. Will he win the fight?
The story. It was Max Kellerman was still obviously with HBO at the time.
Yep.
And after the fight was over, he said that Canelo won the story.
It's bullshit.
It is. And Max Kellerman used to be one of the sharpest guys, critical of a lot of stuff. I remember when he was on Friday Night Fights, he said something about the alphabet guys, and then he pretended to spit on the floor. But I understand they're making a lot of money. And I've done a little bit of television, and, you've got the producer in your ear, and a couple of times I've heard, hey, we're trying to sell this fight. So if you want the money today, you've got to be a salesman. I think the last guy who was any good was Larry Merchant. He was the last bullshit detective and would say it. And I think that was because he was a writer at first.
Yeah, agreed.
He was a journalist.
Yes.
He insisted on that in the print world. And since he's gone, there's nobody that's going to interfere with the bullshit that people are saying. And like a lot of you guys, I mute a lot of it. I turn the sound back on when the decision is going to be announced. Why take away for the enjoyment of a good fight?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what some of these guys are doing. They're just destroying the atmosphere of the fight. And especially when I'm
screaming.
Oh, screaming! Yes,
yeah, screaming.
We're watching the Inoue knockout. And you're trying to enjoy it. You're trying to enjoy the whole atmosphere of it, and he is yelling at the top of his lungs.
Inoue is really good.
I have a comment. I hope so. About Max, I have a story about Max. I adored Max. He was one of the reasons I got into writing, really. Because I used to see him on ESPN when he first started out. And I would think, I know as much as this kid. Literally, that was what made me think I ought to start writing about boxing, And I met him a few times at different events, and we would talk a little bit. And he was a nice guy. I liked him. We had some good conversations. And I remember after one fight, he actually came up to me and said, how did you score it? How did you score it? And we were talking about the fight. We had a very, guy-to-guy kind of way of talking to each other.
Sure.
Some time goes by. He starts working for HBO. I run into him at another fight, and I say, hey, I'm doing a story about this or that. Can I call you and get some quotes from you? And he says, I'll have to talk to HBO first to see if it's okay. So they become really, so indebted to their bosses over there. They're under lock and key or something. I don't know what it was, but I've never seen him since then.
It's money.
What do you all think of Lampley coming back and doing fights now for Triller?
Triller, I think.
What's that?
Triller's in trouble already.
Tell me, I had no idea. Guys, please enlighten me.
Well, they had Teofimo Lopez.
Didn't he back out of his fight?
Now he's back with Bob Arum, so that was the big draw. I think if the Fury, they got him. I think that Triller is going to be out of the boxing business pretty soon.
Wow. Because honestly, I was glad to hear that Lampley was going to come back, and I like that he kind of put a demarcation line and be like, I'll do play-by-play for your real fights, but your exhibitions I have no interest in. And everything you guys said about, Nigel, especially what you said about Merchant, I absolutely agree. And I could be wrong because I never had any direct interaction with Lampley. I did with Merchant. I always respected. guys, this is why I'm happy to talk to you all, because I really respect boxing writers most of all, because they are the shit detectors, and they're the ones that haven't been influenced by the money, and they're doing it. They're still trying to cover the game honestly. And I felt Lampley even did that on his HBO Fight Game show that at least had journalistic tendencies. God, when Tyson Douglas happened, the big upset, HBO really got behind, like, all right, let's really look at this and what happened. And you had Don King and Tyson screaming bloody murder that the fight wasn't stopped 2 rounds before when Douglas was on his ass. And he got a long count, according to their claim. And HBO covered it, and I thought in a very journalistic way. That doesn't exist anymore. It is about selling the event. And Max's weekly show, I hate to say it, but I hate watch it every week. And like I said, Mike is usually the subject of, did you believe what he did? It's like, I didn't watch.
Right, I want to here talking about these assholes, because we don't want to talk about that anymore. We want to talk more about Ringside Seat.
I don't know. Back to it. But
yes,
no, that's
and
really,
the fact that we've we've also got Glenn Sharp's great piece about Tim Harris, which Don was talking about, was so dark. People really need to read that piece, especially. I know I've posted the introduction, the opening with the introduction to Glenn's piece about Tim Harris, who ended up tragically murdering the lawyer of his wife when they were divorcing, and he had several fights, a couple of which were on TV that I was able to actually link to YouTube. But it's a terrific piece, and it's definitely a piece of noir. And the other thing is Steve Farhood's column for this past issue, with all his Mount Rushmores. He just takes almost every category you could possibly think of for boxing, makes up categories and all kinds of stuff, and picks his Mount Rushmore for that particular category. I think it's really cool that Ringside Seat has the 2 editors of The Ring that I read, and I know that Don probably worked for, but that we've got these 2 Hall of Fame, editors of The Ring who regularly write for us.
Steve's a really nice person. I've known him forever, it seems like, and I really like him. He's not Joe Tessitore. he's a really good person.
He's one of the last on-camera guys, or at least his voice is always there. He's scoring the fights for Showtime. But yeah, I think you're right. I think he's an honest broker, and I'm always happy to not only hear him on fight broadcasts, but also when he shows up as a guest on a lot of boxing podcasts and stuff. No, he's an honest broker. Nigel, it was either you or Steve that I briefly was submitting results to back in 1989 and 90 when I first started covering cards here in Chicago. And Bert let my ass hang out more and let me put a little more color in my things. My stuff would get edited at Ring, and I have no. Don't worry, that's not a grudge or anything like that. I've always respected your writing and Steve's writing as well. But that's why
I don't remember you writing for a Ring when I was there. Yeah.
Very briefly, and again, I think Steve was the editor. I think by that point, like I said, it was 89 or 90.
I had 2 terms as editor, one from 84 to like 98 or 99, and then I came back for a long stretch the second time. But Bert had both The Ring and Boxing Illustrated.
Yep.
Time. I worked on both of them, but at first most of it was my responsibility to put Boxing News together, Boxing Illustrated rather, and then things started to change, and we folded it, and it was Ring from then on. But Bert was really something.
Oh yeah.
I've never met anybody. When I first took his job, there were several snide things that he said about me. Right, he was hurt.
Sure,
and, but that faded pretty fast. And after that, he never missed an opportunity to tell people and to tell me that he was proud of me.
That's great.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like a divorce. Everybody's upset at first. Everybody's saying bad things, and then you're oh, she wasn't so bad, and but that was the same. He was just very hurt, but it was his own fault. There was all sorts of financial shenanigans, and actually, I got to get on the tail end of the gravy train. I mean, everybody would go to the fights. I mean, we spent money like we were Sports Illustrated, and the people who ran the thing. The people that Bert will tell you that he didn't put a penny into that magazine.
Okay.
The bank, they called it Manny Hanny Manufacturers Hanover. I don't know if it's still around.
No.
They put up most of the money.
Wow.
Because of Dave DeBuscher.
Sure. Yeah.
One of the owners.
Yeah.
He didn't put up any money either.
One of the great sports moguls, absolutely.
Yeah. So
other people's money. That's like Reinsdorf, Jerry Reinsdorf here in Chicago.
He said a couple of times they made a mistake when they gave me the checkbook.
I understand.
There were embezzlements. There were,
I believe it.
All sorts. I mean, there was a bar right around the corner from the office. It was an Irish pub, and Bert had an account there. And part of my job when he left was to go over the finances. I think he had like a tab of about 30 grand at the bar. One of it was a Christmas party that I attended, where Bob Goodman ripped his hat off and ran away, and Bert chased after him and almost killed him. But then there were other things. For instance, I found these checks for writers who lived sometimes in other countries or in Florida or somewhere a long way away that were cashed around the corner from the office.
Oh, Jesus.
So there was a huge embezzlement of at least $100,000.
Wow.
And nobody was ever prosecuted. I probably know more about it than anybody. I'm not going to tell you who was embezzling, but I will tell you it wasn't Bert.
Well, that's a relief. Okay, good. I'll be honest, it wouldn't surprise me either way. That's, again, shady guys. Don, your books, I mean, filled with shady guys. And again, Chicago, filled with shady guys that were involved in boxing. I could never get Ben Bentley to open up about his IBC days. He's like, I'm not going to tell you, John. It's that simple. And it's like, all right, man, no problem. And yeah, Ernie Terrell. I mean, all these guys that were around the sport while they were alive and everything. So no, I get that. But yeah, Bert was always a trip. He was fun. I do want to swing it back to the magazine and point out another great piece you had, Nigel, and that's this wonderful piece on Hagler.
That's the best thing written, in my opinion, about Hagler after his death.
Yeah.
Whenever possible, I try to take the personal angle because I feel that I write better that way. And so that's what I did. A great story about my daughter and how we watched the Minter fight and things like that. I did that. That was an all-nighter. I'm a very slow writer, but when Bill told me you got to get it done by tomorrow, I was up till 7 o'clock doing it in the morning. And sometimes when you write really quickly, it's not too good. But I just had so much feeling and knowledge about Hagler, it just poured out of me.
Yeah, I got to meet him post-career when Rick Tellender was writing a piece about him for Sports Illustrated, and Rick's based here in Chicago, and Hagler came to a club fight that, oh, God damn it, the South African promoter, Cedric Kushner.
Oh, yes.
Cedric, like Chicago was Cedric's territory.
Yeah, the only fight I went to Chicago, he was the promoter.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, he was kind of the main cheese when I was getting started writing and everything, and even broadcasting. And there've been a couple since then that are still active now. It's more of a club town. Although DAZN brought Alexander Usyk here pre-pandemic, and one of his I believe it was post cruiserweight, one of his first heavyweight fights. He topped one of the cards here. And we've always had Univision and Telemundo cards over the years.
You need a Polish fighter in Chicago. Like Andrew Galata used to draw huge crowds.
Yes, he did. Yeah. Man, Boy, there's a guy that let's be honest.
Part of Nigel's great, Nigel, that piece you did about the boxing's bad guys with Galata and all those guys.
That was just a sampling. I wanted to write about most of the guys that current people knew of, but I threw some old timers in there as well. But,
oh yeah, no, and I knew Galata's guy management here in Chicago, and he was Ivan Drago. I mean, really, that guy never talked. That guy was so stoic all the time and just had nothing to say. And it's like, all right, and what a wasted talent that guy was. I mean, you know, hitting Riddick Bowe twice, you know, in both fights low is so stupid when he clearly was winning and probably would have gone on to bigger. I don't know
if you remember, but when I did that little piece about him in the Bad Guys, they mentioned that the Polish mob that was going big there. And there's always a possibility that if a fighter has to throw a fight for whatever reason, she'll look real good, but find a way to foul out or not fight some rounds. Like, he wants to show what he could really do, because he was winning both of those fights before he started fouling.
Yep. So
that's one possibility. He was, you know, subjected to panic attacks, like before he fought Lennox Lewis. I was at that fight. That was really weird. They were telling all these stories that somebody injected adrenaline into his blood system and all these things. And he would have panic attacks. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no. Again, crazy stuff. Those are the graphics that I grabbed from this current issue, Mike. I don't know if you want to point out other stories.
I wanted to just mention what Glenn Sharp had done about Tim Harris. That was, I'm sorry I didn't send that to you, but that's
all right, buddy.
And Glenn's a former fighter, former light heavyweight. And he's written for us several times. And Don, you were talking about gangsters. Your piece for the last issue about the line of San Marco. That's from 13. I don't know if you probably have that somewhere, unless you threw it out, John. But
no, I have it. But yeah, go. I can look it up while we're talking here.
He could. The title of the piece was "He Could Sing, but He Couldn't Fight." I want to talk about an obscure, fascinating piece, and Don's such a great writer that he can make something like this. That's just, where did this come from into something that is incredibly fascinating?
Oh, I love that story, and it was something that I didn't have room for in Slaughter in the Streets. It was kind of a chapter that I cut out. And I thought, I can't just let this character vanish. He's too funny. He's too weird. The singing, gondolier.
Oh yes.
He deserved, one last story. So I'm glad, like Nigel said, where else could I publish a story about the fighting gondolier?
Yeah.
He was managed by that mobster, though, wasn't he, Don?
What's that?
He was managed by a mobster.
He was managed by Bukala, who was a Boston gangster, who looked like the local pharmacist. He wore little wire framed glasses. You'd always see him eating gelato in the North End. He just looked like this friendly old guy. There he is. Yeah, Phil Bukala.
There you go.
But he loved boxing, and he managed at one point. He was managing 25 fighters, and Tony DeMarco actually approached him at one point and said, "I would love it if you managed me." But this was in the 50s, and the Kefauver hearings were starting, and Bukala basically said, "I got to leave the country. Go with Rip Valenti. He'll look after you."
That's Bukala's the guy that wound up in Italy and was a chicken farmer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because again, covered in Slaughtered in the Streets, Bukala.
Yeah, he in Slaughter the Streets, he got about a little bit of coverage, but in the Ringside Seat story, I expanded it because there was just so much there that was good stuff. Riccardo Bertocciolo. How can you not love that guy with his little
That's
guitar?
the guy with the guitar. Yeah, that's awesome, man. No, Don, truly revelation reading your stuff, and I really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more about several of your books, including the Hagler Hearns one that's coming up. So again, I'm so glad that Mike has hooked us up, and also want to point out, even though Bill has left us, Detloff, his amazing book about Ezra Charles, A Boxing Life, and Mike, honestly, whether it's the ads or the articles, your art direction for the magazine, can never praise it enough. A good friend of mine who covered boxing for another one of the Chicago newspapers, the Daily Herald, he and I were talking last night, and he said, "Yeah, man, I watched your interviews with Mike and the guys," and he goes, "I started buying Ringside Seat," and he goes, truly, this is my buddy Jeff Carlson, who used to contribute to Flash Gordon's old boxing newsletter back in the day.
Boxing program.
Yep. But yeah, he had nothing but praise for Ringside Seat. And he said, "No, it's a great magazine," and it is, and it's a pleasure to read every month or every quarter when it comes out, because again, it's one thing to cover the fights, and we're really lucky that I think this summer is going to be very interesting, and there's a lot of great stuff to talk about currently. But boxing has such an incredible history, and it's these nooks and crannies that don't get the coverage. Everybody knows the Ali story. Everybody knows about the Four Kings. And, even, of course, Joe Louis and Marciano and Graziano and all the greats of the age. But that's why Don's coverage is great. That's why, Nigel being able to go into granular coverage of the Philly years. And, you got to be kind of a boxing historic fan to know Gypsy Joe Harris. But, Nigel can speak chapter and verse on him, and Bernie Briscoe and some of these great, Philly fighters that, were not Joe Frazier and weren't Jeff Chandler. And I mean, even Jeff Chandler, I think, of a certain age, I'm guessing a lot of fight fans may not know his wonderful story, and also looking for, go ahead, Mike.
When he was fighting, he was the highest paid bantamweight of all time. Of course, things changed, but yeah, Jeff was, yeah. Mm-hmm. I think he fought for maybe like $250,000 most of his TV fights.
Sure. No, it's a great. It's the magazine, and please, Mike, it is. It's a great
I was just
font of knowledge.
That, when I started the magazine, and I missed Nigel and Bill and Eric, who were no longer with the ring, and I wanted them to have a voice. But I spoke to Eddie Muller, and working on Noir City magazine for the Film Noir Foundation for many years, and that writing is the most important thing, that the writers are the most important thing. I knew I had enough confidence in myself as a designer to be able to do what I needed to do, but it's all about the writing. It's always about the writing. Movies, it's all about the writing. And the same thing with periodicals. You got to have great writing. That's what's going to make a great magazine, a great publication, is the writing. And there's no doubt that all the writers inspire me, but a lot of credit also to Bill, who is the one who comes up with the ideas for and discusses it with the writers. And so it's a collaborative process. It really is. And the writing is really important. Historical stuff is really important, but I think we also try to mix in, what's going on now and what's to come. And even like Ronnie's article about the alternative realities, the what ifs, the great what ifs. I think that's a great idea, because, it just gets you thinking in an alternate universe, and that, John, with comic books, what's Earth 2, Earth 1, it's like what could have happened, what might have happened. I mean, it gets people thinking, and I think I'm looking forward to Ronnie's next part of that too.
No, it's in the zeitgeist. You're right. I mean, since Avengers Endgame and the subsequent Marvel television shows and coming movies, so it's very much in pop culture. Even on television right now, Superman and Lois, that TV show is kind of exploring alternate worlds and alternate histories, and it's just a good bar kind of discussion of, Yeah, but what if Ali beat Frazier in that first fight? Would we have had the trilogy? Would there be a need for the trilogy?
It's the guy sitting around the barbershop or the bar, and you can talk about that type of thing. So like I said, I hate to beat the drum, but it's like you're not going to find anything like that except in Ringside Seat.
No, if
you can put up the website, I mean, because anybody can get.
I don't have the banner set up, but do it and I'll put it up.
ringsideseatmag.com. But anybody can you can order the print issues, you can order the books, our books, and there's a bunch of great free articles on there. Don's written some articles on there.
Let me fix that. Where the hell is it now? Shame on me. Where is it? There it is. Let me fix that G. Put that G in there. I was told there'd be no spelling today. Or math. There we go. Ringside Seat. Yes, there we go. Ringsideseatmag.com. Absolutely. Yeah, not only the magazines, both physical and digitally, but also you put out
our annual books, which was, again, a model after the Film Noir Foundation. They put out an annual book collecting the best pieces from the digital edition each year. I mean, this is only our 4th print issue.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing the print issues. I like those. Those are nice. I remember when I was a kid growing up and I was reading magazines, you would pick up a Sports Illustrated or the magazine that was just called Sport, and there would be stories about the past. And so, you'd see a news story about, Wilt Chamberlain or Jabbar or something.
Yeah.
But then you'd also see something about Jack Dempsey or Jake LaMotta. You'd see old stuff that was mixed in with new stuff. And so I grew up thinking, oh, well, the old stuff is just as relevant as the new characters, But I think that has been lost over the years. I don't think you pick up a magazine now and see anything older than last week. I don't think there's as much of a regard for historical pieces or historical coverage as there was when I was a kid, and Michael's about my age. So,
I agree. I mean, I grew up reading Sport and Sports Illustrated, and there's no doubt that those had a heavy influence on me, and I'm hoping that Ringside Seat is kind of a mixture of the two. Sport was more about feature-oriented articles that, because it was a monthly, it wasn't necessarily, it didn't have the timely newsy stuff that Sports Illustrated did, which was a weekly. I mean, we're a quarterly, but I think that we probably are a little more like Sport magazine in the sense that more feature-oriented. But, I mean, we've got, Bill's editorial and, we got Nigel's piece about Marvin Hagler after he passed away in there. And Nigel's written pieces about, the Triple G Canelo fights, both of them. He
wrote a couple of Pacquiao articles for him.
And he wrote about Pacquiao fights too. So,
yep.
I mean, we try to blend the two, so it's like, we're not the old man magazine.
No.
The old man in the sea.
I think they're definitely filling a void.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I don't know. Hopefully the audience for that void will grow, but there's nothing quite like it.
I think the fact that both network and cable television have found boxing is an interesting subject. Again, you had the ABC Mike Tyson 2-part documentary. You had the Kings on Showtime. I have to say, in the absence of HBO, while I'm not crazy about most of the team that does the fights for Showtime pay-per-view and their monthly cards, I have to give them credit for still investing in boxing as they do. And I'm glad that they are reminding people of the great history. And again, I mean, it does sound like we're a bunch of old men that, it's not as good as it was, years ago. Sadly, I think in the case of boxing, that is true. Again, Don, you're about to do the Hagler Hearns book. And I know I've told this story before on my podcast about how I was a music DJ in downstate Illinois the night of the Hagler Hearns fight, following it on our news teletype machine. And when that bulletin bell would sound and you knew that there was a new round being described, it was exciting as hell. And really, and certainly like in the case of Ali and Frazier, the world stopped for that first fight. I mean, that was massive global news. The Hagler Hearns fight was also massive global news. And I remember Magic Johnson and maybe another NBA player like breaking camp from the Lakers and sneaking off to Vegas so that they could be ringside. While they're NBA.
Those fights would become part of the lexicon for weeks and weeks. If somebody got knocked out, they'd say, "Oh, he's down like Tommy Hearns." They
Absolutely.
Every sport would kind of gravitate to it.
Those
I went to
photos of Hearns being let out of the or carried out of the ring, literally. Oh my God, shocking as hell. What were you going to say, Don? Sorry about that.
I was going to say a few weeks ago in Brockton, Massachusetts. They had Marvelous Marvin Hagler Day, and it was on his birthday. I went down with a friend of mine, and what surprised me was the turnout was surprisingly small. Really? I would say there were less than 200 people there. And it just shows you that a lot of time has passed, That's why I did the Hagler Hearns book this year. If I waited a couple of years, the window starts to close, But not a lot of people were there. The people who did show up, they were very appreciative. And it was outdoors at Marciano Stadium, which is the football stadium outside the high school. And, Al Bernstein was there. He gave a nice little speech. A couple of other media types were there. One or two fighters did video greetings, that kind of thing. Sugar Ray Leonard did a little video piece that he sent, and it was shown on a big screen. But yeah, I just kept thinking there are only 200 people here, because I remember there would be thousands whenever Hagler came back after a big fight. They would be lining up on the street for, the big parade that Hagler would be in after a couple of his big fights. When he beat Minter, there was a huge parade. When he beat Hearns, there was a huge parade. And I'm thinking, wow, that parade has shrunk to about 200 people, Yeah. But time really does a number on you, So in a way, I feel like I'm almost obligated to, give all of these old fighters one last time to howl,
Yeah, and what was a reminder in watching the Kings was how, and I mentioned this before, is how boxing was transcendent. It's a sport that was very transcendent into the times. It was a reflection of the times. I mean, Ali is the obvious one, but there are comparisons and talking about Leonard and Reagan and how things had changed from Carter to Reagan and how the country had changed. And that's just not going on anymore. You just don't see that. I mean, you might see it in other sports, and boxing was that sport that had more of that. Historically, it has so much in its history. But it was a sport always that transcended sports outside the ring because of the characters and because of the people who they were. And the idea that at one time, the heavyweight champion was the king of the world. I mean,
yes,
he was thought of as the baddest man on the planet. He was, and I'm going all the way back. I mean, and he was an important figure. I mean, it's not that way anymore for so many different reasons, whether it's the alphabet belts or the way boxing is promoted now or the television coverage, but it's just not, it's different. But it was, what was the reminder of the Kings was how it was at one time a transcendent sport.
Absolutely. And another thing I liked about the Kings, and Nigel, I point this out because you haven't watched it yet, was they really gave Hagler his due and really made a point of saying how Marvin literally had to fight for every opportunity to get recognition, respect, and finally be at the table of, okay, this guy is.
Well, they said everything
serious
that
fighter
Nigel
that we need to
said in
pay
his
attention
article. I have to say that. I mean, Nigel covered it all in his article about it. And they did him justice the way Nigel
right. Well,
did,
that's my point. Yes.
Without it being in a personal way, the way Nigel did it, and so
sure.
such an elegant way.
Agreed. And that's the only reason. Like they were on your wavelength, Nigel, in a different way, but absolutely they made like that, and that's my relief, because again, as I said with the Moneyball example, as you likely feel, Nigel, having covered it already yourself, you're like, I know the story. I don't need someone to retell me the story. It's good that they, in Showtime's presentation, really took the time to tell it accurately and as detailed. I mean, they spent 4 hours. I mean, it's a 4-part, hour-long each part docu-series, and it really, I was impressed with the level and of what they covered. And as Mike said earlier too, that they didn't cut to talking heads, but spoke to the right people, and beyond the fighters and the promoters and everyone that was still alive, and writers that knew, the trainers and the managers and the like. Having even Jackie Callan as the publicist for Kronk back then, and as tight as she was with Emmanuel Stewart and Tommy Hearns, I think was a good, important voice to have in there, and brought another.
They should have had Nigel on there.
They should have had Nigel on there. You're absolutely right about that.
I'm telling you, I watched that and it was like, why isn't Nigel on here?
I don't agree.
I've got one thing I can tell you that where you're going to see me.
Please.
It seems like forever, but it was probably 2 years ago. I went up to Brooklyn. They were doing a documentary for Netflix, and it was based on that book. I can't remember the author's name. It was called Blood Brothers, about the relationship between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. And
great book. That's a great book.
Randy Roberts?
Yes, Randy Roberts.
Okay.
Randy Roberts.
But anyway, I went up there and they interviewed me, much like when we did the most recent Sonny Liston thing. And I had almost forgot about it. I kept looking on Netflix. I thought, where is this? I've never seen this. And then out of the blue, suddenly one of the guys sent me an email. He wanted to know what I wanted written underneath my name. And I told him, and he said, well, we're still waiting for Netflix to give us a spot. So I think they were promised sometime this year. So, and I don't think it's called Blood Brothers. I think they changed the name, but maybe not. But I'll be there.
Great.
I've already spent my money.
That's great, Nigel, because I tell you, that is a fantastic book. And I wanted to bring up, we were talking about documentaries. Oddly enough, I wanted to bring up the HBO 2-part documentary that was about Muhammad Ali and how bad that was, and how they fucked up talking about Malcolm X, the relationship with Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, and what Muhammad Ali did to Malcolm X. They made it out to be like, oh, they were great friends, and Muhammad Ali, they just left it at that. Oh, it's tragic, what happened to Malcolm X. It's like, read that book, Blood Brothers, or watch this documentary series that Nigel's in, because you want the truth. We
can handle the truth. Yes.
Well, just related to something more recently, when we were talking about Sonny Banks, that my good friend Jeff Jarrett was actually at the fight and helped me with the story. It's hard to find people, that were relevant, that we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah.
To us, because it's in our lifetime, it doesn't really seem that long ago, Everything happened in 10 minutes. But it's got to be somebody like Ali or Sonny Liston. I mean, there's actually more interest in Sonny Liston now than when he was fighting, it seems. He's become a real cult hero.
Yes.
There were a lot of people people I knew anyway, that felt very badly for Sonny, and they knew what the score was. And one of my friends who's dead now, Jack McKinney, he was a sports writer for the Philadelphia Daily News when Larry Merchant was the editor, put together the best sports department ever. And Larry Merchant knew this guy, and I went to Jack McKinney's funeral with Larry Merchant, but Jack McKinney sparred with Sonny Liston.
Wow.
He was the only guy that the media that Sonny trusted. And I think there is an actor playing Jack McKinney in that most recent Sonny Liston thing. Didn't look like him, but it was him calling ahead to Philadelphia to say that this guy who's living here has just won the heavyweight championship of the world. He wanted to try and have some sort of greeting, somebody from the city, something to welcome him as we got home after winning the heavyweight championship. And nobody would do anything. And when Sonny stepped off the plane with his wife, and he saw there was nothing, all he did, there was like a deep swallow in his throat. And I think that broke his heart.
Sure.
Because this was his chance not to go straight, because the mobsters still had their fingers in the pie. But to if you're the heavyweight champion, you have more power and you can do some things. And I talked to a guy called Teddy King, who was one of the cronies that hung out with Sonny Liston, trying to talk about his personality. And he said, if Sonny liked you, you were golden. If he didn't like you, forget about it. And I think he was just betrayed by many people. Starting with the mob, but they got him out of jail early. It's like, once they get their hands on you, they're in. But yeah, I mean, there was just the famous story of how every police cruiser in Philadelphia had a picture of Sonny Liston on their sun driver. They once arrested him the episode was called The Lark in the Park. He was driving through with a friend through Fairmount Park, and the cops pulled him over, and they gave him all kinds of tickets and stuff. And they said he was speeding and this, that, and the other. His attorney actually hired a traffic expert to prove that there was no way that Sonny Liston could have been driving that fast. And he won the case. Sonny was cleared. But nobody remembers that part. They remember the part that he was arrested. And I'm not saying he was a saint, but I don't think he was the horrible person he's often,
When John Kennedy tells Floyd Patterson, "You must beat him," because and I'm paraphrasing essentially how evil Liston was, and no, it really is. It's a tragic story. It truly is, and I loved Nick. How'd you feel about Nick Tachis' book?
I thought he was very good about the early part of his life. He really investigated, where he was from, where he was born, what his early life was. When he got later into the succubus place about the spirits invading his body and all that, I thought it was a little bit far-fetched.
I'll tell you, Sean Assail's.
Yeah, I think
book,
that.
Sean's is actually a friend of mine. And he's written a couple of things for Ringside Seat. And Nigel was a contributor to Sean's book, The Murder of Sonny Liston. And Sean was the producer, right? Sean's the producer of the documentary. Based on his book.
He wasn't the producer, but it was based on his
book.
Okay.
I don't think he wrote the script. How it is in movies, one guy writes the book and then somebody makes the screenplay. But
sure.
I'm not really sure of that. But his book was fascinating.
Yeah, Sean's book is great.
He basically boiled it down to the guy who was the hairdresser, drug dealer guy. I don't know if that was the right guy who did the killing or anything, but I'm sure he was killed because he knew too much.
Now, the flip side of all this was, and I wanted to talk since Don is here, is that Don wrote our 40th anniversary piece about Raging Bull. And what I really loved about it was not only did Don, do a great job talking about the making of the movie and how the movie came out and how it was received when it came out and how it changed over time, but the realities of who Jake LaMotta was. And, if you can talk about that a little bit, Don, because it's like Jake LaMotta was not well liked at all. Or respected. And it's amazing how now he's, For Robert De Niro.
Yes.
Yeah, like Nigel said about Sonny Liston, there was more interest in LaMotta long after his career than when he was actually fighting, and it was largely due to the movie, and I remember seeing LaMotta at a few events. I saw him at the Hall of Fame actually the weekend Nigel was inducted. LaMotta was there. And I saw LaMotta at another event, maybe a year or two after that. And people were like really bowing down to him, really. So there was one guy yelling, "God bless you, Jake." and I remember thinking, are they talking to Jake LaMotta or Robert De Niro?
Right.
The second fight that Hagler had with Hamshaw at the Garden, Jake showed up, and I guess that was not too long after the movie. I'm not very good on dates.
No, you're right.
About 3 years.
Standing ovation.
3 or 4 years after it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was like, like I said in that little piece about the bad guys, that the movie made him a minor celebrity the rest of his life.
Yeah. Before the movie, he was a bouncer in a second-rate strip club, living in a one-room apartment. Then he's getting standing ovations. But I also think that in a way, I know he was a great fighter. I'm not saying he wasn't a great fighter, but I even wonder if he's a bit overrated now as a fighter because of the movie. I think the movie just really rocketed him into a stratosphere that he might not be in if not for the movie. People would say, "Oh yeah, he had that win over Ray Robinson, but then Robinson beat him 5 times." They really elevate him since the movie. And I wonder, is it too much? I don't know. I know he was great. You see the old clips of him fighting, and he was, a dynamic little performer, and he was very slick. He was slicker than people give him credit for being. But I wonder if they overrate him a little now because of the movie. I don't know. Maybe they do.
I'll tell you, if you watch the last fight with Robinson, and Robinson eventually stops him on his feet, early part of that fight, he was out jabbing Robinson.
Yeah, he had that little.
Yeah, he was a real. I mean, he threw Cerdan on the canvas and dislocated his shoulder in the first round, but I'm sure that was on purpose. And he wasn't a clean fighter, but he was a great fighter. And he wasn't a crude slugger.
Right. He was crafty.
Yeah.
He was crafty. And he was like, I remember talking to Angelo Dundee about LaMotta. And he said nobody remembers how quick he was. He was quick as a cat, and he would kind of play with his opponents like a cat, kind of circling a mouse, kind of sneaking up on it, He says he was not a roughneck like Nigel said. He was a very crafty.
I wish I could see the Cerdan fight. There's no footage of. I mean, I was able to find on the anniversary on Twitter for the Ringside Seats. I found like clips of it. It looked like it was almost like home movies. Like somebody had just had a camera in the audience and they're at ringside up and showing it. But there's no. I would love to be able to see just like the whole fight, be able to watch it because. I know Cerdan was there. There was a wrestling match, and he was thrown down. He hurt his shoulder, and then they had to stop the fight. But I'd love to see that fight.
I always wondered if there was something fishy about that one too.
I agree, Don. I always wondered about that too. It's one of the reasons.
Was there a rematch? Did they say you hurt your shoulder? We'll have a rematch.
Well, and he was going to have a rematch until Cerdan's plane crash, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
So. A couple thoughts. First of all, in terms of Don's point about how good he was in his era, that's likely the most competitive era of middleweights. Where even Bert Sugar once even told me that Jack Warden, the actor who used to fight at middleweight under the name Red Costello, was a solid middleweight, but was never going to break through. Given that top 10 of active middleweights. When you consider Graziano, Tony Zale, Cerdan, LaMotta, Robinson, that
even
era.
Those French guys that they all fought, Villemain and all those guys, they were all good.
Yep.
Right.
And the other thing regarding his celebrity post movie, I can, on firsthand knowledge, tell you what an insufferable SOB LaMotta was. We had him on our local Chicago TV sports magazine show. They used to run Sunday nights after the news. We brought him in, and our host loved the movie and really thought he was watching a documentary, and would cite scenes from the movie and talk to LaMotta about him. And LaMotta's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Even, I mean, and certainly LaMotta was in his 80s at this point. But yeah, he was just the most miserable man. I just found a great clip of him from The Tonight Show when Burt Reynolds was hosting, and this was in New York, and a bunch of old fighters had gotten together and they were doing an exhibition tournament for, I want to say, cerebral palsy. And in the audience, God, they had Willie Pep, they had Tony DeMarco, they had Basilio was there. So many great fighters from the East Coast. LaMotta gets on stage and brings a bag of boxing gloves, and Ed McMahon is trying to goad Burt Reynolds into like throwing punches with them. And Burt's like, I'm not going to do that. Are you nuts? And it's funny, Don, because as you say, the stupid like jobs that LaMotta had in his, prior to Raging Bull, he had all of his stock comedy one-liners that he probably performed at his club and at those strip joints in between acts and stuff. And yeah, I mean, the corniest, this guy's got cauliflower fingers. And it's
right. Yeah, I fought Sugar Ray so often. I got the diabetes. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So
to be a contrarian here, Jake LaMotta really liked me. And
that's great. Good.
Before the International Boxing Hall of Fame, the Ring Magazine Hall of Fame was the Hall of Fame. It was basically a paper Hall of Fame, but when Fleischer was there, we still had the plaques and all and stuff like that. But Jake wasn't in it, and because throwing the fight and
the Cox fight,
there were a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame that threw fights. And I just felt that it was unfair that, if guys like Kid McCoy were in there and even great fighters threw fights. So at that time, it was done by a mail ballot and you had to get a certain percentage. I can't remember what it was. And he got enough votes. And I put him in the Hall of Fame. And we didn't have any money. We were practically bankrupt, but we hired a bar and there were some other people going in, like Jose Napoles that year. We got some people from the Mexican embassy in New York to come over and stuff like that. And he actually wrote a second book. It's called Raging Bull 2. And at the end of the book, he talks about getting into the Hall of Fame finally. So, I mean, there was a lot of real bad guys in the Hall of Fame already.
Yeah.
And I felt that, I don't know if any of you guys agree with me or not, but he should be in there. And so obviously he liked me.
There's no doubt he's one of the greats, but I love that Don's piece, kind of talked about that, that he wasn't like well liked among like writers, other boxers, right, Don? I mean,
W.C. Hines didn't like him. A lot of people were not into him. They thought he was kind of a lowlife. And like Nigel said, that's not unusual in boxing. But
right.
It seems that some of the lowlifes can win over the press, and others cannot.
Yep.
And I don't think Jake really courted the press when he was a young guy. I don't think he gave a shit about them. Maybe he was hiding something. Maybe he was uncomfortable around them. I don't know. But one thing that I love about that story too, Michael, was that Scorsese didn't even want to direct the movie. It took De Niro quite a few years to convince him this is going to be a good story that we can turn into a good movie, because that book had been out for a long time. And De Niro had read it. Back before Taxi Driver, he had read it. Which is kind of interesting when you think about it.
And De Niro got him at a point where Scorsese was kind of on the downside of his career because New York had come out, it had flopped, and he was having drug problem.
Yeah, he had a drug problem, and he was in the hospital.
Right.
And De Niro said, "Are you ready now?" You know? Yeah, because Scorsese's not a big sports fan or a big boxing fan. Scorsese had a funny quote one time where he said, "The only boxing movie I ever liked was with Buster Keaton when he hit a guy in the head with a chair." He went to his corner, he picked up the stool, and he hit his opponent. Yep. He said that was the only boxing scene that ever made sense to me.
That's in my opening. The lobby card for Battling Butler is in my opening for when I do the big bout. Absolutely, man. Ed has a good question here. What did you guys think of the accuracy of the Hector Camacho documentary?
I didn't see it.
I didn't see it either. I didn't see it because Don told me not to see it. I told Don about it, and I said, "How was it?" And I think you were the one who told me that it wasn't good, right?
I thought it was. I thought it was good.
No. It was the Duran movie, the movie with.
The Duran movie. I didn't care for.
With De Niro.
That was the one you told me.
Yeah, with De Niro. Go on.
Yeah, the Hector Camacho documentary on Showtime, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I did. I saw it a little while ago. It's a good documentary to watch if you want to see a guy slowly dissolve into a drug addiction, and it was kind of it just really showed you the hold that drugs had on this kid. But the one thing I objected to, I shouldn't say I objected to it, they made Camacho look like a knockout artist, which I thought was funny. They used all the best clips of him dropping guys, so you walked away thinking he was Mike Tyson or something. They didn't show, him running and hugging and killing time and looking at the clock. They didn't show that part of his career. They just showed him when he was, lightning quick and dropping guys, which was the early part of his career. He was, pretty great. But if you watch that movie, you'd think he was just a pure right-handed knockout artist, the way they cut it, In
the documentary, Don, was there much about his murder?
Oh, yeah.
There was some stuff. His son, I think his son went to the murder site.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, Hector Jr. went to the murder site and was trying to talk to people. There were some suspicious characters. Wasn't there a cab driver who was involved, and now he was killed too since the making of the movie, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but I would recommend watching it. It's not a bad documentary. It's pretty good, but they do make him look like a murderous knockout puncher. Which was
anybody ever arrested or convicted or anything?
No, it's still a mystery. Yeah.
The one thing
like anyone who is heavily involved in drugs, they're a drug addict. They have a lot of friends who are not the best people to hang around. And that was the impression you got. He was involved with some, good friends who kept him high and, liked being around the drugs and the fame. And meanwhile, he was just taking the worst part of it all,
my two memories of Camacho, and Nigel, I wonder if you were at this press conference when Greg Haugen, it might have been the Haugen-Camacho fight. They had a tribute. No, there was a different one because Dan Duva was alive. I know after Dan Duva had passed away, the promoter, I was at one Camacho press conference, and they were running a video tribute to Dan because this is obviously Kathy took over Main Events, his wife, and kept the company running. And Hector was late to the press conference, and during this video tribute to Dan, the doors burst open, and Hector's there, and it's Macho time. And it's like kind of walking into a wake and not realizing that, we're right in the middle of a eulogy. You might want to tone it down. And instead of really looking like, oh, I'm sorry, he laughed and walked to the podium. And I'm like, you piece of shit. And this is when he was still fighting. That bothered me. And then, but a funny story about Hector, and it was really more about Greg Haugen when they had their press conference, and Mike Marley, the writer, wanted to ask a question, and he asked Greg Haugen, and he's like, "Hey, Greg, what'd you think of when you fought?" And blah blah blah. And Haugen goes, "Marley, I ain't saying shit to you." He goes, "You've always been lousy to me. You've always written me as the opponent. You've never given me any respect. Why should I even take a question for you? Fuck you." And so then Marley goes to Hector, and he goes, "Well, Hector, what do you think?" He's like, "Nah, I'm with Greg. I ain't saying shit to you either, Marley." And finally, Dan was like, "Well, I'll talk to you, Mike. Don't worry." So I'll give you a quote. But yeah, that's a funny thing that I remember Hector being involved in. But yeah, I don't know. Were you at that? Do you remember that tribute to Dan? And
No, I wasn't.
Being the immature guy that he was. No,
I wasn't.
okay.
I think I would have remembered that, but no, I wasn't.
Do you remember, any of you, Saturday Night Live? They actually did a sketch where Adam Sandler played Camacho breaking into a funeral, like a memorial. Again, you talked about how big boxing used to be and how it touched all points of the culture. Adam Sandler was playing Hector Camacho.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. No, you're right about that.
Now? Can you picture Joe Biden coming up to Deontay Wilder saying, "You've really got to beat Tyson Fury. You've got to do it." You know, it's a different era.
I agree, man. Guys, I'm so sorry that we're going on for 2+ hours, and it's after 10 your guys' time. We could wrap up. I'll point out once again the excellent issue 14 of Ringside Seat with these amazing covers. Again, on the right, that's the digital cover. On the left, that's the print cover. And the place to get it is go to their website, ringsideseatmag.com.
And also, you can get the print issue around the world on Amazon. So if anybody goes to Amazon and they want to get any of the books, the annuals, same thing with Don's books,
That's what I was going to say. Absolutely, man.
Go to Amazon.
Jake LaMotta's in this book too. He's coming up in another chapter there, John.
All right, I'll hang. I promise you, Don, I will finish. And truly, I will be bugging you about coming back. Nigel, I'm sorry I don't have.
I would love to. I'll come back with all these guys.
Oh, and that's great too to hear, man. And seriously, yeah, Mike, as many of the Ringside Seat guys, you can. I would love to talk to Raskin. Another great thing, and we mentioned it briefly. You'll always find great reviews of movies and other books to read, and that. And again, I have the ad for Detloff's Ezra Charles book, but also great reviews of books. And you're giving me a great not only reading list, but other guests I'd like to have on the Big Bout podcast. And Nigel, you and I were exchanging emails today. I want you to come back and we'll talk about your book as a life. Well, I don't know when you started, but as a marijuana user, and I'm a marijuana user.
A great review for me.
What's that?
Don wrote a great review.
Oh, that's great, man. That's excellent. I'm looking forward to talking about it, man.
You know, it's funny. I used to love reviewing books until I started writing books, and now I can't do it because I know how hard it is to write a book. I don't want to talk shit about somebody's book if I don't like it. If I like the book,
that Marciano biography was great. I'm sorry, it was great.
Oh, that was fun. But yeah, it's hard to write book reviews now for me. I've had to do it for a couple of other people, and it's fucking hard now. I don't know why. Since I wrote a few books, I'm like, I don't want to talk about it, But Nigel's book was a good book. I recommend it.
I'm excited.
I'm glad he's coming out now. As
sales picked up a little bit when I came out. Not the bestseller by any chance, but it has.
Nigel, can you put the title up?
It's called Travels with Mary Jane: Confessions of a 70-Year-Old Stoner.
Let me.
So
Mike, thank you. That's great. Thank you, Mike. Because I dig through it and pull an image off of online or whatever if I could. But no, Nigel. I smoked, as many of us. We smoked it in college. I stopped for a while. I got hired by this all sports talk station that had a sister station, was the Heritage Rock station that was formed by former hippies, and pot was around at the office parties as much as booze was. And so I started smoking again because literally the owners of the radio station did it. So everybody was cool about it and never looked back. And I have to say, as some living in a state where they finally legalized it, I was like, I really thought this was going to take until I was in my 70s. And then maybe it would finally happen. So
I had
I'm
too
very
many
happy.
books.
Did you
I have
find it
too
or
many
not?
books. I can't find it, Nigel. But here's the
The
story.
dog probably ate it.
Here's my story. When I first met Nigel to talk to Eddie and Nigel, to talk to them about Ringside Seat and getting it started,
Yeah.
went into his hotel room, and what is the first thing that Nigel and I do? Go into the bathroom, and we're smoking hash.
Fire it up. Oh, very nice. Guys, am I wrong? That great HBO documentary about the first Ali Frazier fight, and George Benton in his later years is on camera, and it sure as hell looks like he's rolling a blunt. I don't know, but he is definitely, I mean, it's like, no kidding, as you see the space between my fingers, a really long and thick, if it's tobacco, okay, but it sure as hell looked like a blunt in the same way that the rappers that were performing on that Triller card back in December in between fights that featured the Tyson Jones fight, and some of the rappers, while they're performing, are firing up and smoking. Again, I'm in a state where it's legal. It happened in California where it's legal. I have no bad judgment when it comes to marijuana. To me, that's my after hours cocktail, in the same way that my father would have a glass of scotch when he knew work was done. So I know, and I've been to Amsterdam, so I'm really excited to read about your travels.
It's not straight stories about getting high.
I'm hip.
It's basically sort of a travel log to various stoner sites. And
My favorite part
I don't
was
know. The truth is, it's so far. Nobody's told me they didn't like it. I'm sure there's people out there that don't. But Don, let me ask you: is the store open up again?
Yeah, it's tourist season has started, and because of the coronavirus, Massachusetts is pretty well vaccinated. But last summer was a bust. We didn't have many tourists last year.
Not only did Don write a great review for me, some friends of his who have a bookstore. It's not even really a bookstore. It's part bookstore, part souvenir, kind of seashore place. They've sold a couple of hundred for me.
That's great.
Yeah, I have my books in there too, but Nigel's books are it's more popular because I think we have more stoners coming through town than boxing fans. But I was glad to help. She puts it in the window occasionally, last year was a bust. The virus really kind of turned us into a ghost town up here, but this year we've got some tourists again, so maybe we'll sell some copies for you.
Yeah, let's hope so. Every little bit helps.
Hey, Michael, did you want to hold up the Four Kings issue that you designed, or
I sent it to. Yes, I have it here.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, shame on me. Hold on.
Wait, hold on. I got it.
Yeah, if you all right, good. I apologize, Don.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm glad that you brought it up.
We talked about my stuff, and I figured.
Yeah, no, please hold on.
Shout out. Yeah,
there we go.
The Ring Magazine put out a little special edition about the Four Kings. I did a story in there about Duran, and Michael designed the cover that you're looking at right now.
And the issue, and the whole issue, actually.
The whole issue, yeah.
That's great. Hey, man, Doug Fisher. I like Doug a lot. Doug has been on Word Balloon. He'll be back on this summer at some point. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of the guys that are currently at Ring. But again, Ringside Seat, not just because of the friendship that I've forged with Mike and getting to know Bill better, getting to know Nigel. It's great to meet you, Don. Finally, I respect your guys' writing a lot. And as Mike said, that is the key to good product, is good writing. And certainly Ringside Seat always delivers. RingsideSeatMag.com for my audio audience. A reminder once again, issue 14 is the current issue. You can also pick it up at Amazon. That's where you can find Don's books as well, like Slaughter in the Streets, the brand new book about boxing and the mob, and how boxing became, or Boston became, boxing's murder capital.
A tongue twister.
Yes, but Don gives you chapter and verse on that. And looking forward to talking to Nigel as well. So about
and also, if anybody is interested, if they want to read Nigel's great piece about Marvin Hagler, It's free up at the ringsideseatmag.com. It's up at the website. If you go under free articles, you can read that piece. It's a really
we have a good amount of free articles. Anyone could get a good idea of what Ringside Seat is all about.
Yeah, Don wrote a great thing about it's adapted from I think your website, your piece about Fat City.
Oh yeah, that was from my blog. Yeah, and also I did some fight reports. I did a Lomachenko fight last year, I think. I have a few up. You can see some good things on the website without subscribing, but then subscribe.
It'll give you a great. You're right about that, Don. It'll give you a great example of the way stories look in Ringside Seat. Again, people watching can get an idea a bit from some of these images that I pulled from issue 14. But that said, there's great free content that will really give you a sense of the magazine. And again, if you're a fight fan and you're not already aware of it, I hope this leads you to it, and you won't be disappointed. Again, it really is covers what's going on right now in boxing, but also covers great books about boxing's history. Does great historic articles itself. Great reviews.
I also want to plug the yearbooks that we do.
Yep,
that's right.
We put together, or Mike and Bill put together a yearbook with the best stories of the year. I'm always proud to be included in that, and that's another good way to start. You can go on Amazon and pick up one of these yearbooks. What do we have? 2, 3 now?
We've got, this was our third, and we don't have subscriptions to the print issue right now because it's through Amazon does all our fulfillment, but you can subscribe to the digital edition. And if you subscribe to the digital edition, you will be we'll send you the latest yearbook, our latest yearbook for free.
That's a bargain.
That's a good deal, right?
Absolutely. No, guys, real pleasure talking tonight. And I can't thank you enough for doing this. It's always fun.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
I'm always happy to have you back for the next issue or the next books that you guys are working on. Also would be happy to talk film noir, Don, with you at some point because
I wrote a few articles for Noir City back in the day.
Don, when are you going to write again for Noir City?
I would love to, but I think I don't know if there's anything left to say about film noir.
Oh, come on! You kidding?
We'll have to find something that hasn't been touched on yet. Every idea I have, I think it's probably been done.
That's great. Guys, thank you very much. I'll wrap up, everyone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to the Big Bout Podcast.